Hello. Well, I would like to share some of my thoughts about the Saturn and Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Now, I realize that there are probably thousands of people sharing their ideas and epiphanies out there concerning this, and I know I am one more, and I have been meaning to do this for quite a long time. So I've actually had these ideas simmering since the eclipses last summer, and there have been so many epiphanies and insights. Now, this is long. This is way too long, and it has to be long because there's so much to say about it. And in fact, I had to cut a lot out, and it hurt. So this is actually an abbreviated version, believe it or not. So this is a part history lesson and part astrology. So bear with me because there's a lot of information here, and I hope that it's not too boring. Also, please listen till the end because I think some of the most exciting information is in the second half, and I will leave the end with a big epiphany. So also, I just want to say to about this channel, please like and share and hit subscribe and watch it. I am a very tiny channel, and if you are watching this, thank you. I appreciate you so much. Now, I don't do this channel because I'm a professional astrologer. I do this because I am passionate. So I just wanted to say I have no investment in making this video or any video except for passion and love. And so it doesn't benefit me in any way if I'm a popular channel, although it feels good. so I am just doing this to get my messages out there. So if this resonates with you, please like my channel, like this video, and share it. Okay. So I have to say, first of all, this conjunction is touching some very sensitive parts of my own chart. And specifically, the main one, it is happening within a degree of my descendant. So if you speak astrology, you know that's a very fine point. Now, I usually get really euphoric when transits are coming up. I get inspirations, and it's very exciting. So this one has felt really different for me. I have felt a great need for solitude and introspection, and I've been feeling a lot of deep purging. I've had, in the past couple months, I've had a lot of quiet time in the forest. I've been doing a lot of meditation, but meditation that is just to clear the mind and be at peace, not meditation for inspiration or getting any ideas. And I've been feeling the need for lots of purging. In fact, I've adopted a new lifestyle where I've been doing quite a lot of water fasting for days to purge my vessel. And it's been absolutely amazing. But it is kind of incredible that I've been feeling this great need to purge. So another thing that I've done, and if you're my friend, you've probably noticed, I have withdrawn from social media. And completely. And in fact, I have withdrawn from all media, really, including my voracious hunger for astrological information. I really just had a space and time where I've just been quiet. Now, I usually have a lot of chattering voices that whisper insights, especially of astrology, for me all the time. And the last couple of months, things have been very calm. And my mind has been a very quiet place. And this is not my usual state. My desire for being a hermit actually is why I'm recording this with voice, not a video. Because I really haven't even felt like dressing up or looking lovely. And if you know me, you know that I can have a tendency to be vain. All right, so there we go. There's the disclaimer that I am feeling this conjunction and this transit coming, and I've been feeling it for a while. Now, I have to say that I realize that I am hemisphere-centric. I am a person who lives in America, and I have got the descendant of Northern European DNA. So I will say I have a resonance for the history of the Western world. Now, I do believe, for me personally, that there is more than just my lineage to make me connected with Europe, especially Europe of the age I'll be speaking. I believe that reincarnation is the path of the soul, and that if I am right, and it is, I have zero doubt that I lived in the times of which I will speak. I feel that, and I've felt it ever since I was a little girl. I've always been very drawn to the Renaissance, even from an age where you wouldn't expect a kid to be devouring history. So I feel like my investment in this conjunction goes far back, far back. So, as I said, this recording is going to be very heavy on Western Europe and America, and I realize that there is a whole world out there that also has been affected by these conjunctions. And if you have insights on other countries and other places, I would love to do more. I simply just could not research the whole world for this. Okay, so I'm going to start this by saying a beautiful line from a book which was written in the last age, and it was that it was the best of times and the worst of times. And Charles Dickens said this. And this is so applicable for the last 500 years. So when I started putting all this all together, I wept. I really did. I felt the weight of this age. I felt the grief of these last 500 years, and I also felt the inspiration, the light and the beauty and the wonder, because these were part of it too. I would say this time period since the last conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn in 1518 has been the most dynamic time in history. So I do spend a lot of time pondering how astrology works. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I do think that astrology works in one major way because it is the act of bringing cycles to our consciousness. And I think that this conjunction has a lot to do with that, with consciousness. And in astrology, all signs and planets have levels and dimensions of significance. There are also levels of personal and collective relevance. So mundane and spiritual, all of it is important. And there is certainly shadow to speak of here. But since I just said that consciousness is the most vital ingredient in manifestation and in astrology, I don't want to dwell on the shadow of Capricorn or Saturn or Pluto, and really where we are in this moment, because I believe we are at the beginning of a massive reckoning. Now, the word Renaissance applies to this conjunction and the last, and we were there and we are there. Now, in Latin, the word Renaissance is from renaissaci, and it means to be born again, to rise again, to reappear, to be renewed. And that is where I think this all begins and where I think it all ends right now. So, on January 12th, 2020, Saturn and Pluto will be conjunct on the 22nd.5 degree of Capricorn. Now, this is such a simple chart. It's amazing. And that is because there is so much concentrated energy in Capricorn. Now, when I say simple chart, that just means that when I looked at it, I couldn't believe how few aspects were really happening in between planets. And that is because so much is conjunct in one area. Now, in my opinion, where the sun is equals consciousness. And we count our days by the sun, and no matter what planet is on what degree, we mark our time by the sun. So it is the light that brings life and awareness to us. So I strongly feel that that awareness and consciousness will be increased with this conjunction. Now, The conjunction is right after the Mercury cazimi, which is when Mercury is conjunct the sun and it means in the heart of the sun, or in the throne room of the king. Now, this is actually happening during the January 10th eclipse. And this is powerful, and this is sacred. And it is really interesting because Mercury's last cazimi was with the sun was on 11/11 of 2019. And not only was Mercury cazimi, but there was a Mercury transit across the sun. Now, this is rare, and this is powerful, and this is sort of like an eclipse for Mercury. So this conjunction is infused with light. And I feel strongly that this gives the potential for awareness and awakening to increase. Now, to add blessing and wonder to the chart, Jupiter is on the south node, and this is right after Jupiter was conjunct galactic center in his own sign of rulership in Sagittarius. Now, this conjunction also has been preceded by powerful eclipses, and I will talk about those. Now, I love conjunctions because I love cycles. And astrology is very much about cycles. So a conjunction, when two planets meet in a point, and it is the end of the last cycle and the beginning of a new. So it is the point that I love to look at for so many things. Now, slow planets like Pluto and Saturn, their energies are more collective because they move so slowly through the chart. And so when they conjunct, it's a little more rare as well. And so I think all the potentials are there for this conjunction, for either light or shadow. And I think we are being given the offer of light, with the sun being part of the conjunction and Mercury in its sacredness, just having met with the light of our solar system. We are being offered with this conjunction the chance to make great light. All right, so as I said, the slower planets, they're more a collective energy in their conjunctions. Now, Saturn's cycle is 29-ish years, and Pluto's cycle is 248 years. And so these two actually come together every Saturn cycle. So a Pluto and Saturn conjunction is not completely rare, but it happens about once every 30 years. And the last time they came together was in 1980 in Libra. Now, these conjunctions can happen a few times in a lifetime. And so, I think, however, the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn has been quite a long time. And I think that this meeting will take us to another age and another paradigm. So really, this all starts with a history lesson. Because the last time that Saturn and Pluto met in Capricorn was in 1518. So we are reviewing 500 years. And we are actually also reviewing 2 Pluto cycles since the last one. So the time that Saturn and Pluto met in Capricorn before 1518 was 1284. And that was pretty much right on schedule. That was not, there was no meeting missed in Pluto cycles. Now, it is said that the Renaissance period was 1300 to 1600. But really, the peak of the Renaissance was in the 1500s. But the spark was lit earlier in that previous Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn cycle. Now, when a cycle of any kind, any kind of cycle at all, is nearing a completion, it is called the balsamic phase. And that is concentrated and intense. So the balsamic phase of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn for that period of time of 1284 to 1518 was absolutely paradigm shifting. And without question, it set the stage for the world to change forever. Now, just as I suspect that we have been in the balsamic phase in our own time of this this Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Now, there were 4 really powerful events that happened in that balsamic phase, and I think they affected the conjunction of 1518 and caused ripples of magnitude in the events of the world. Now, the first, everyone should know this, is that Christopher Columbus in 1492 sailed the ocean blue. Now, this is the official, quoty fingers, official discovery of the New World, although we all know people had discovered it long ago. Now, it's really fascinating that Saturn was in the last degree of Capricorn in that cycle before the conjunction. So Saturn had gone around and was in Capricorn one time before the 1518 conjunction when Columbus did find America. It was in that balsamic phase that the world became much larger. Expansion happened. Now, greed obviously was a motivation for the exploration. People wanted gold and they wanted treasure. And of course, spices. We all know that Columbus was on a route to find India and the spices of India, but that did equate with riches and wealth. So now, the explorations that followed the greed, they were more noble for certain. And I think they were inspired by the Renaissance. Now, the second event that inspired the Renaissance and the actions after the conjunction in 1518 was the Corpus Hermeticum being translated by Marcello Ficino in 1474. Now, it was a Neoplatonic school in Italy, and it was funded by Cosimo de' Medici. Now, this is philosophically the most remarkable translation to affect the age, along with the Gutenberg Bible in 1454. Now, this lit the fire of the Renaissance. Now, the Gutenberg Bible was the first printed biblical text, and it was in Latin, but I feel that the Gutenberg Bible was the third event that influenced the actions that followed the 1518 conjunction. Now, back to the Corpus Hermeticum. Now, it was said to be the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, who was supposedly a contemporary of Moses. And the spiritual revelations that came in this text were the conversations between Hermes and the divine Pymander. Now, please, please, please read the Corpus Hermeticum. It is packed with wisdom and insight, and it is a view on our relationship with the divine. And if you don't have time to read, there are YouTube videos where you could listen to it being read. So I urge you, please, in honor of this conjunction and of these last 500 years, please look into the Corpus Hermeticum. Now, there was later a little bit of a controversy about the Corpus Hermeticum because it obsessed Europe in the 1500s. It was quite all the rage to be a hermeticist and read this text. So with this obsession, the court of King James, who will later give us the King James Bible, had put a lot of work into discrediting it by claiming it was actually not ancient in origin. Okay, that's a little side note. So back to Florence in the Renaissance. Now, Florence was the creative power center of Europe in the 1400s. And the Medici family were the bankers for the Vatican, so they had plenty of power and money. But they also had a desire for knowledge and spiritual expansion and expressions of art. And they did fund many of the great artists that we think of as iconic in the Renaissance. So in the fall of Constantinople in 1453, there were libraries with precious ancient documents, and those were smuggled quickly out of the country, and the Medicis got a hold of many of them. Now, Marcello Ficino was a humanist and a philosopher and a priest, and he was quite busy being paid and funded, patronized by the de Medici family. He was translating the works of Plato. And this was the first time that the works of Plato had been translated and in modern times. And it was into Latin. That was the language that he chose to translate it into. So when the Corpus Hermetica emerged, Cosimo de' Medici had him stop Plato's translation and begin immediately translating this great work. So he saw the value in it. Now, in the text, it is the inspiration that instead of the fall of humanity being born in sin and shame and separated from God, it is that we are one with the divine, and that our origin is light sparked from divine light. So that discovery was very powerful, and it was a completely different philosophy than the world was experiencing at that time. Now, I would say that the ancient works of Plato and Hermes Trismegistus were absolutely some of the fires that lit the Renaissance. Now, at that time, the Western world was controlled by the Catholic Church, and all spiritual beliefs were monitored by the Church. It was really a religious monoculture, and even monarchs answered to Rome. This was the period of time of the divine right of kings, and they were all in service to the Holy Father, the Pope, and the papacy, and Mother Church. And so it was really, at that time, it was really a religious empire. And that was the great institution of the age. Philosophical exploration was really dangerous in the age before 1518. Now, at this time, Mass was given by a priest in the language of Latin. And most people were illiterate, even in their own tongue. They couldn't read. Certainly, they were illiterate when it came to a language like Latin. So the only people that really were literate were the rich or those who took the cloth. So all spiritual guidance in this time was in hierarchy, and it was filtered through church dogma and given in a language that most people didn't understand. And so in addition to that, the wisdom was then translated by the priests to the people. Criticism at this time was dangerous and deadly. I mean, this is a great monolith of power that controlled the Western world before the last conjunction. And so to consolidate the power even greater was the fact that monarchs were granted their power by the divine right of kings. So it was the belief that the monarch of a country was chosen by God, but they ruled in subservience to Rome and the Pope. All right, so this brings me to another more shadowy event that was going on in Europe before the 1518 conjunction. And this was the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition. And that was 1478 to 1834. Now, that was a horrendous time. Spain was one of the most prized monarchies of the Catholic Church. And in this time, heretics of all kinds, Muslim, Jew, philosophers, heretics of all types were tortured and killed. And this is a bloody and horrendous time in history. Okay, so we've set the stage for 1518 conjunction. There was deep shadow and control, but there was also a spark of light from the New World and ancient philosophies that had been rediscovered. This is the moment that huge cracks were developing in colossal institutions that comprised the Roman Catholic Empire. So I feel as if the tools were given in this balsamic phase to start the restructuring of belief and power and society. Now, the fourth event that fueled the paradigm shifts after 1518 was definitely the most powerful and most well-known. In 1517, on October 31st, and this is just 2.5 months before the conjunction, Martin Luther nailed his 95 treatises to the church door. This was a small action that had a huge impact. It was paradigm shifting. Now, Martin Luther was a devoted German monk, And what he was criticizing was the practice of indulgences. So indulgences at that time, it was the practice where one could purchase an indulgence from the church. Now, this was kind of a free pass to escape hell or to lessen your time in purgatory. So you're buying your way out of punishment for your sins, basically. Now, this whole practice was sanctioned by Pope Leo X. Now, he was raising money to fund the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica. And so he was okay with the church making a little extra money by selling free passes to get out of hell. Now, it's really important to know that Martin Luther was not seeking to destroy the Catholic Church. He was simply seeking to reform it. All right. But in that action, it was the beginning of a huge action, and that was the Protestant Reformation. All right. So the stage is set, and now I've come to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 1518. Now, it happened on the 4th degree of Capricorn. Now, please remember that, 4th degree of Capricorn. In a perfect world with perfect circular orbits of planets, we may have conjunctions equally in every cycle and every sign, but it has been 500 years since the energies of these two have cleared the soil for a new seed in Capricorn, and this is so significant. In spite of the thrilling spark of the Renaissance and the explorations into philosophy and science and art and spirituality, there was certainly darkness and cruelty born in this age of conjunction. And I think in particular how it related to the New World. It is really fascinating and really tragic that the African slave trade began in 1518, year of the conjunction. Now in 1519, just after the conjunction, Spain, with its expansion in the New World and quest for gold, conquered the Aztecs in 1519. So we have two horrific precedents in the New World, which would set the tone and set the course for manifest destiny. The belief that Europe had the divine right to conquer and take over and expand any people, place, or thing that it wished because God sanctioned it. That's manifest destiny. So the racial enslavement of people and the extermination of native cultures was the tone to expand the New World. So, as the Corpus Hermetica translation in 1484 was philosophically huge, so also is the translation of the Tyndale Bible in 1522, after the conjunction. Now, this was the first translation of the Bible into the common tongue, not Latin, English. And this publication was as significant to the monolithic power of the Catholic Church as Martin Luther and his theses, I think. Now, this was a paradigm shift for how people could relate to the Word of God, and as the Word of God was seen in those times, without the presence of church, priest, or language. This was not acceptable to the Catholic Church, and this did also contribute to the Protestant Revolution. Now, as I said, I'm really passionate about history, and particularly British history. And I feel that this history is so very relevant to the superpower that is the United States, because the United States certainly is the child of England. And I also think that a great majority of this 500 years, the British Empire was so large and powerful that it was said that the sun never set on it. So the events that sent shockwave through the Western world definitely had their foundations here. In the time of the conjunction, it was the period of one of the most famous monarchs of England, King Henry VIII. Now, King Henry began his reign as a devoted Catholic. In fact, when Martin Luther made his criticisms, he was highly critical of Martin Luther, and he wrote his own treatise defending the Catholic faith. At that time, Henry's wife was Catherine of Aragon. Now, she was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, and her nephew, Charles V, was the Holy Roman Emperor, which means that Spain was the darling of the Catholic Church. So, although Henry was married to Catherine, he met and fell in love with Anne Boleyn, one of my favorite figures of history. Now, she was rumored to be a Protestant supporter. And so she had joined the court in 1522. Now, she was fiery and beautiful and passionate, but she refused to be his mistress. She would only accept being his wife. Now, his passion and pursuit of her was to cause one of the most significant breaks that a monarch had ever made with the Catholic Church. So King Henry left the Catholic Church as they would not grant him a divorce from Catherine so he could marry Anne. Now, as a result of this break and his excommunication, Henry founded the Church of England. Now, in his founding of that church, he was both monarch and spiritual head, and he took his entire country with him. Now, this is a massive paradigm shift in history. When he left the Catholic Church, he broke the monoculture and monophilosophy of Europe. And so there was still very consolidated power, but it changed the dynamics of power in Europe and the power of the papacy, because no longer could the Pope say it was the head of the church and state of all of Europe. Now, even though Anne was beheaded in 1536 for supposed infidelities, this love affair has proven to be one of the most influential in history. And I really do think that it was the catalyst that began the crumbling of power, and probably the crumbling of power of the most powerful institution the world has ever known. All right, so there's some really interesting astrology about this. So Pluto had been in Capricorn from 1516 to 1533, and Pluto left Capricorn in 1533. So the year that Henry left the Catholic Church, married Anne, and established the Church of England was 1534, the year after Pluto left Capricorn. He married Anne Boleyn in 1533, in fact, January 25th, 1533, and they were married until her death in 1536. Now, Queen Elizabeth, who ruled till 1603, was also born in 1533. She was born when Pluto left Capricorn and entered Aquarius. She, by the way, was a Virgo sun with Capricorn rising. Now, Henry did have a first daughter, Mary Tudor, and she was the future queen before Elizabeth, and she was born before the conjunction in 1516. I find that very interesting. Now, Pluto had just entered Capricorn when she was born. Now, these two queens actually had their sons in opposition, queens and sisters. And they were actually, it's so interesting because they opposed each other for power and in spiritual philosophy. Mary, when she was queen, was called Bloody Mary, and she tried to halt the Protestant Revolution, and she was trying to return England to the papacy. And there was a lot of burning and killing associated with that. Now, Elizabeth, on the other hand, was Protestant, and even though she was not perfect, she was a much more tolerant monarch. When Elizabeth did rule, her rule was called a golden age, and one of her nicknames was Gloriana, and that roots from the word Orianus, or heavenly. She was a sun queen. And I would actually love to make a video of the astrology of Queen Elizabeth, because I think she embodied so much of the age of Virgo and Pisces. She was called the Virgin Queen, and she is my favorite queen. So in her age, the age of Elizabeth, it was the age of discovery and pillaging the new world. And in her time, we had some of the most amazing and inspiring and enigmatic figures in history. There was William Shakespeare and Francis Drake, Christopher Marlowe, John Dee, and Giordano Bruno. In fact, the Hermeticists, who were so inspired by the Corpus Hermeticum, as I said before, it raged throughout Europe in the Elizabethan age. And they were so obsessed with this newly discovered ancient knowledge that they had actually called for Queen Elizabeth to be the first Hermetic queen and to rule a new philosophical golden age in a Hermetic Europe. I find that very interesting. So William Shakespeare, His works need no explanation, and they have endured time. In fact, his complete works are second only to the King James Bible in publication. They are so treasured and inspiring. John Dee, he is one of my most fascinating figures of history as well, and he was one of the most learned men, if not the most learned man in Europe, and he had the greatest library of the time. He was very well read in ancient philosophy, and he was undoubtedly a hermeticist and an astrologer. In fact, he was Queen Elizabeth's personal astrologer. Another figure of the age who is my favorite heretic is Giordano Bruno. And he spent 2 years in England in the Elizabethan age, so I would like to think that he had contact with John Dee and certainly Queen Elizabeth. And so he was one of the most incredibly influential philosophers in Europe of the time. Now, he was a monk, and although he was a monk, he was also a hermeticist. And he was part of the Copernican revolution that changed our paradigm of the cosmos. He made the declaration that the stars in the sky were all suns hung like lamps. So he had the realization that our sun was a star and that we revolved around it. Now, that declaration was part of the reason he was burned at the stake as a heretic. All right, so when Elizabeth died in 1603, she was childless. And so King James, and there's a lot of history, more history and politics on that story, became her heir. Now, he is the monarch who gave us the King James Bible in 1611. And this is the standard for our Old and New Testament and the words of Jesus Christ. And now, it's really interesting to note that in his translation, none of the scholars who actually did the translation work knew Greek or Hebrew, ancient Greek or Hebrew. That's very troubling. There are many passages in the King James Bible that actually were altered for political purposes to protect the divine right of kings, because as you'll see, this was a theme of the time. So, since the Protestant Reformation began with Martin Luther, the Tyndale Bible, and the Church of England, the King James Bible, and the Corpus Hermetica, all of these events drove people to begin to question not only their personal relationship with divine and the hierarchy of the church, but also the divine right and rulership of kings. Now, we see the beginnings of democratic uprisings and revolution in the Old World and the New World at this time. This is when people began to realize that they not only had their own spiritual power, but they had their own governing power. So the era of King James is when we see the English Civil War and the 30 Years' War of Europe begin. And it has much to do with the divisions of Catholics and Protestants, and government not being exclusively in the control of royalty. Eventually, King Charles, who was the son of King James, was beheaded by the people as a result of the English Civil War. And the result of this was the end of the divine right of kings, that a monarch could only rule if Parliament, not God, and not the Pope gave them permission. So obviously I feel that one of the most significant events that emerged from the last conjunction was the Protestant Reformation. And this was because the knowledge of the divine, as it was seen in its time, was held, studied, and translated by members of the hierarchy. The revolutionary acts of freeing divine words, whether they are of Christ or Hermes or Plato, into ever more understandable language of printed texts for the people, opened doors of freedom to humans personally and privately to connect with the divine. And this, I think, gives ever-increasing hope of freedom in every aspect. So this is what I feel that the Protestant Revolution did right. It took a soul's relationship with Creator out of an institution mixed with money, greed, and power, and made it one of personal relationship. At the same time, in its zeal to separate the purity of the teachings of Jesus from what it saw as wicked ritual, superstitious tradition of the Catholic faith, it lost a vital balance. It removed the reverence for the feminine, and for Catholics, Mary, from its dogma. In fact, the veneration of Mary was one of the key issues that Protestants had, and they still have, with Catholicism. I have wondered if one of the vital awarenesses that we have missed without a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn for 500 years is that there is a feminine balance lacking. Now, Capricorn is actually a feminine sign or a night sign in the zodiac, and its rulership is of Saturn, and it is Saturn's feminine side as well. So just bear that in mind. Now, I made a video that spoke at great length about the cycle of Venus in her last retrograde, and that spanned from the retrograde until the Venus-Mars conjunction in September. I had some epiphanies about the burning of Notre Dame in relation to that. Now, it was my first video. Well, it was actually 4 videos, and they were not well made, but I urge you to watch it if you can, because even though I did a pretty awful job of filming it, the information there is really, really important. So there's a lot of depth, and I won't include that here, but this Saturn-Pluto conjunction is squaring both the degree of the Venus retrograde, but also the degree of the burning of Notre Dame. So I believe that these events are indicators that the power of the divine feminine is certainly a phoenix, and she has risen. And by the way, a baby who might be born on this conjunction would have been conceived in that fiery April event of Notre Dame. And if you're listening, you know who you are when you hear that. So I've gone through a lot of history here. Now, more talk about astrology. So I had a huge epiphany about the last conjunction. Now, the precession of the equinoxes is about the wobble of the earth. And this deserves a much longer explanation than I'm giving now. But it is the reason that we have what Plato called a great year, when the sky moves 1 degree in retrograde motion for every 72 years. The spring equinox sun rises all the way through all the signs in about 26,000 years. And these are the great ages, the ages of Pisces, Aquarius, and they are a result of this action. So I have to admit that I did my best to create the most accurate chart that I could for the 1518 conjunction. So in that time, we had a calendar switch, and I have to admit that I don't have expensive software to do historical charts. It's something I need. So if anybody wants to donate money, then I will buy the software. I'll buy it anyways, but because I love doing historical research in astrology. But I didn't have the software. And so the chart that I have, I did my very best. But what I can say is that with a greatest degree of surety, I can say that the conjunction was the 4th degree of Capricorn in 1518. Now, this is astounding for many reasons. And as close as I can tell, the sun at the day of the conjunction in 1518 was about at the 15th degree of Capricorn. Saturn and Pluto were at the 4th degree. Now, this is amazing. The conjunction is very near, just a couple of degrees off, to the perihelion of the sun and earth. Now, this is such an important and potent time in the elliptical orbit of our planet. And it's remarkable to note that in 1246, now remember, 1284 was the second most recent conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. So 1246, due to the precession of the equinoxes and elliptical shifting of the earth, the winter solstice was the same day as perihelion. That is huge. I would say that in itself is the beginning of another great cycle, of which I will hopefully be doing another very long video about. So I want to mention at this point how exquisitely beautiful it is that for the 2020 conjunction, as well as for the 1518 conjunction, the sun was present in the sign of Capricorn at the time. Now, this does not necessarily always happen. Saturn and Pluto, they're not like Mercury and Venus, who never stray far from the sun. Now, this means 2 things. First of all, the conjunction is happening in light and in consciousness. And I feel like this has an intention of blessing and really uplifting energy. But secondly, it means that, like this conjunction, there is no retrograde motion of both planets to recall the energies and reconjunct. So both Saturn and Pluto, when they are retrograde, they must be in trine to the sun. So our next Saturn retrograde will be like 4 degrees from 22.5. So not quite coming back to that conjunction point. Pluto will retrograde over the conjunction point just once, and it's actually nearly exact the degree of the conjunction in the stationing of that retrograde. And that'll be from March 26 to October 6. And so during that time, Saturn will pass over that conjunction point, but I'm sorry, I said Saturn. I meant Pluto. Pluto will be passing over that conjunction point, but having conjunctions with Jupiter and not Saturn. Now that's a whole different story. So, in the cases of both 1518 and 2020, it is a remarkable and powerful infusion of energy in just one dose. So, one time. Now, the 4th degree of Capricorn is Christmas Day. And that is a most holy Christian day. And considering the sacredness of the earth and her journey around the sun, it is also a revered day for the light of the sun. It is the day that the winter solstice, which sparks the new light, is completely over. Solstice means sun still, and the sun sits on the horizon motionless for 3 days. And then it begins with our perception to move north again and to grant ever-increasing radiance to the northern hemisphere. Now this conjunction last began in the degree of this potent movement with the blessing of the new light in 1518. Now, even more incredible was the realization that because of the precession of the equinoxes, the 4th degree of Capricorn in 1518 was actually where galactic center was positioned as well. Galactic center in many cultures has been considered to be the source, like the great womb, the origin of knowledge and of spiritual knowledge. To have the conjunction of these 2 planets on this point is immensely powerful. Now, when I realized all this, I was out for a run, and when it all hit me, I almost fell on my face. I was so struck by it. So if there was ever a moment to light the fire of a renaissance, an enlightenment, and a new age, this is it. This is powerful placements and timings. Now, another planet that's repeating a cycle is Uranus in Taurus. Now, it's amazing. In 1518, it was in exact trine during the conjunction. In fact, I am fairly sure that it was nearly exactly at the same degree that Uranus is right now. So I deeply feel that the empowerment that Uranus can give to people and populations, as well as genius, it can grant genius and enlightenment too. It can originate from the the energy of Uranus. And we may be seeing similar energies playing out. Now, it's really important to look at the points of Pluto that it made in the full 2 cycles since the last conjunction with Saturn. Now, since Saturn returns every 29 years, it would be completely exhaustive. Like, it would actually probably be a dissertation to look and research each date of Saturn going back over the 4th degree of Capricorn in the last 500 years. So I'm going to keep it to just Pluto. And since we've had 2 full Pluto cycles since the conjunction, there are many aspects to ponder. All right. So Pluto opposed the conjunction point in 1681 in the first cycle. Now, this is the year that Charles II, who actually was the first king of the restored monarchy who was sharing parliamentary power, King Charles II granted William Penn the land that would become Pennsylvania in Pluto's first opposition. Now, if there was a theme of the 1500s and 1600s of ever-increasing desire for the interpretation and practice of freedom of faith without hierarchy, or to have a government where the power lie with the people, not the divine right of kings, then the New World, in its infancy, was the fertile ground for this seed sprouting. Pennsylvania would prove to be the garden for this new paradigm. America, the United States, is certainly the child of the themes of the 1518 conjunction. Now, Pluto returned to the conjunction point of 4 degrees Capricorn in 1764. At this time, the nodes of the moon were in Aries and Libra, and Uranus was in Aries as well. Now, I feel this cosmic layout is the energy of independence and passion. And for America, the Revolutionary War period was 1764 through 1789. And the timing of this is exquisite. If you use July 4th, 1776, and this is when the Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Continental Congress, then the United States has Pluto at 27 degrees Capricorn in its birth chart. And this conjunction that's happening January 12th, 2020, is definitely not far off from that point. So without question, the next cycle of Pluto was one of the most accelerated changes in the history of the world. The dates for the Industrial Revolution are considered to be 1760 through 1840. And by the way, Pluto rules fossil fuels. That's very interesting. Many of the themes of the initial conjunction played out again and again. The question of slavery came to head worldwide in this time, and the annihilation of native people worldwide and the age of imperialism was unprecedented. Without a doubt, the shadow side of Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn were evident in this period of time. And although the time of the burning of religious heretics and religious idealistic wars were largely over, there is plenty of tension that remains between religions in this last Pluto cycle. So the struggles for governments and the wealthy and the powerful to keep ever consolidated power have obviously not diminished in the last cycle of Pluto. Now, the next opposition of Pluto to the Capricorn 4-degree point was in 1918. And it's amazing to me that this is when World War I ended. Now, this was a war that was really not fought about ideals or religious or governmental freedoms. This war was fought simply about power. And it was unprecedented in its destruction. And in many ways, I feel like World War I really was the end of the old world. It was the end of the old world and the beginning of the new one that we are currently in. Now, Pluto returned to the 4th degree in a really recent memory. And that would be November of 2010. Now, interestingly, the nodes of the moon were also conjunct in that time. So there was a lot of concentrated power and themes that we are seeing repeated. There was actually a really powerful lunar eclipse on the solstice in 2010. And by the way, Pluto was on the north node during that eclipse. It was in the eclipse family Saros 125. And I actually remember watching this winter solstice eclipse in its entirety. It was so magnificent and powerful. And I remember thinking, like, this means something in the world has changed. All right. So you really don't need me to recount the world events since 2010. There's probably too much to even recount. Things have been happening so fast. I will say that we are certainly living in interesting times. Eclipses for this investigation, as with all astrological studies, are really important. And no matter what chart I'm looking at, for whatever reason, I always look at nodes and eclipses. Now, it's really important to understand a little bit of the mechanics of an eclipse. And by the way, I am recording this during the lunar eclipse of January 10th. So that's significant to mention. So they happen because of the lunar nodes, and this is the north and south path of the moon around the Earth. And it's a cycle that shifts about every 18 months in retrograde motion. Now, the nodes can be called the gates of destiny. And so an eclipse happens when the sun and moon meet in a new or full moon with these nodes. And that's when eclipses occur. Okay, so there is a greater cycle to eclipses as well, besides the 18-month shift around the zodiac. And they happen in families, which are called Saros cycles. Eclipses happen in a Saros family every 18 years. And these eclipse families are part of a cycle of eclipses that have 70 to 80 eclipses, and that cycle lasts 1200 to 1400 years. Now, these Saros cycles wax and wane in strength, much like a moon phase, actually, and they have a birth time and a birthplace. So when an eclipse family is born, it's the seed point of a very long and powerful cycle. There is so much potent information and powerful indication when you start to study eclipses. So eclipses are the conjunction of our most significant luminaries, the king and queen of our skies in the perfection of orbital patterns, our light and the most powerful reflection of our light. So they always have powerful effects, personally and collectively. They are the beginning and ending of cycles, great and small, and there is so much information of incarnational intention, both personally and collectively. They are energies of where we should grow and what we should release, and those secrets are hidden in the nodes. And I think really in their highest vibration, they are moments of cosmic unity for our planet. So this conjunction in 2020 has been preceded by powerful eclipses in Cancer and Capricorn. Now, the 1518 conjunction was preceded by eclipses in Sagittarius and Gemini. So the solar eclipse of Saros cycle 124, that's the preceding eclipse to 1518. It occurred just as Saturn had entered Capricorn. And I would say for certain, that the energies of Sagittarius and Gemini, and by the way, the eclipses, the nodes were, the sun was at 15 degrees of Gemini and Sagittarius for those eclipses. So I would say those energies are an undertone of the past cycle. And in the sign of Gemini, we have themes that can be great curiosity, study and language, very important, learning and the willingness to expand one's mind. In the energies of Sagittarius, we have high philosophy, teaching, far travel and exploration, and a missionary's zeal for spreading one's beliefs. So with much of what I've said, I will say that these themes certainly fit the last 500 years. And I would actually call this last 500 years the age of the book and the age of the explorer. It fits really well. So much of the changes of light and shadow that we have seen have been influenced by these energies. Translated languages and philosophies published for the masses shook hierarchy, and a new world opened to exploration and expansion with passion and fearlessness of those who had strong beliefs were also a theme. So that brings me to the eclipses that have happened in this past year and right now that are part of this conjunction. Now, one of the eclipses that happened last summer struck me very deeply. So on July 16th, we had a lunar eclipse in the lunar Saros series 139. The eclipse actually had Saturn and Pluto on the south node in Capricorn, and they were just hovering near the conjunction point. So when a planet is on the south node, it does give an indication of energy that needs to be released. And when a planet's on the north node, it's an aspiration. And I really need to say that Venus was on the north node for this lunar eclipse. Now, when I looked at the birthday of Saros series 139, I was amazed to see that it was born in 1658. So this is the year of the death of Oliver Cromwell. And now he was the leader of the Roundheads. And he was a Protestant and a parliamentarian of the English Civil War. He was the leader of the Protestants for the English Civil War. He was one who inherited the new government. And so he was the protector of the realm for the new republic. And he was the head of state, essentially. Now, this war ended the Protestant Catholic Wars and the divine right of kings. So the connection of the birthday of this Saros cycle and the conjunction pattern and the events that accompany it of Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn just astounded me. I feel in many ways that this summer's lunar eclipse was a clear message to let divisions and old karma go before this conjunction. Now, concerning eclipses and their birth dates and the relevance to our time, I have to mention that solar Saros series 139 was born in 1501. Now, this makes the second eclipse in the series fall in the series 139 fall in 1519, the year after the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Now, this is not only relevant because of the timing with Saturn and Pluto, but the next eclipse in our times of Saros Solar 139 is in 2024, and this happens to be the next great American eclipse. Now, remember the last great American eclipse. It was incredible. And it will cross the country south to north this time, and last time it was north to south. So, interestingly, the eclipses that we are having right now are at the midpoint between the two American eclipses. And so these Capricorn and Cancer eclipses are right in between the two. So the solar eclipse that we had on Christmas Day, and that was Christmas Day in Pacific time where I live, also has remarkable ties to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1518. It's remarkable. So the conjunction happened on the 4th degree of Capricorn, Christmas Day, when the sun is moving north again. And the eclipse that we just had, the sun and moon were positioned at the 4th degree of Capricorn. This is one of those astrological timings that bring me so much joy. So it is in Saros series 132, which was born in 1208. And interestingly, there was one of this series in 1280, just a few years before Saturn and Pluto conjoined in Capricorn in 1284. And then it happened in 1515 and again in 1533. Now, remember, Henry married Anne in 1533. Queen Elizabeth was born in 1533, and Henry founded the Church of England in this time. Now, Pluto also left Capricorn in 1533. And this is a case of wheels within wheels in astrology. Now, the eclipse that's happening actually right now, Friday, the 10th of January, 2020, is in Saros series 144. And this series was born in 1749. And it has absolutely no history with 1518. So this is a beautiful piece of this astrological puzzle, in my opinion. This eclipse that is happening is younger than this cycle. Although it was born in the balsamic phase of Pluto's first cycle since 1518. I feel that the karma and weight of this first Pluto cycle is not present in this eclipse, but we might have some reminders of the world that we created in the second Pluto cycle. This is a wonder that this is happening. The moment of the eclipse is that Mercury will be Cazimi, which is in the heart of the sun. Now, this is a most potent and sacred moment. Now, earlier I had spoken of how I feel that the nodes in the eclipses in Sagittarius and Gemini set the tone for the last conjunction. So what do the nodes in Cancer and Capricorn mean? I feel that the significance of the lunar nodes being in Cancer and Capricorn, besides just adding more energy to Capricorn for this conjunction, is that there will be an undertone and hum of these energies throughout this cycle until the next conjunction. Instead of the age of the book and the explorer, we will be entering a time that in its highest vibration, the spark of the human soul and the spark of the divine are mirrored with each other. So I had an epiphany once, which is remarkably relevant to this conjunction. This is a whole new sidetrack that I'm going on. So I had been pondering the indigenous saying that decisions must be made to consider 7 generations. So I got to thinking just what percentage of you is left with 7 generations. So basically, if your parents are 50-50 and your grandparents are 25% and the great-grandparents are 12.5%, the 7th generation is when you are a percentage less than 1%. And this just amazed me. What genius the indigenous people had. So basically, make decisions until you disappear. And so, of course, I had to relate that to astrology. So I chose the magical processional number of 72 to be a generation. But then I realized that that didn't actually work because no one really has babies at the age of 72. So I halved it. So when a generation in the 7 is 36 years, then the astro magic happens. And that is 252 years, which is essentially a Pluto cycle. So 7 generations is a Pluto cycle. Now, that has led me down so many rabbit holes. And this is my own opinion, but I have a feeling that incarnation and soul intention follow a Pluto cycle. We may follow family lines and DNA lines and themes for a soul's growth for a Pluto cycle, or maybe more than one Pluto cycle, I might say in this case. I think this gives personal investment for our souls in this conjunction. So each soul has a definite intention to be here now, for the previous generations and for the next 7 generations. Any energetic intention that a soul carries with Cancer and Capricorn energies are vital right now. Related to the incarnation wonder of Pluto and the 7 generations is an exploration that I have been having about the cycles of Venus. Now, you didn't really think I'd make a recording without talking about Venus, did you? So this is worthy of another 2-hour video, and surely I will be making that at some point in much more depth. So this was an informational lightning bolt that hit me regarding this Saturn-Pluto conjunction, both in 1518 and in 2020. So the Venus star cycle is perfection and beauty, and it happens with great regularity every 263 days, actually. So beyond the Venus conjunctions with the Sun that make a perfect star pattern, we have a greater cycle of the Venus transit. Now, this is when Venus crosses in between the Sun and the Earth in perfection. So it appears as if she is traveling across the Sun. Now, this has everything to do with the nodes of Venus, which are the north and south orbits of Venus. Now, her nodes change every month, but for transits to occur, her nodes must be in Sagittarius and Gemini. Now, this actually is a 4,000-year cycle, and we are actually right now halfway through that 4,000-year cycle. So when the Venus transit happens, it will always be the inferior conjunction or the morning star when she makes these transits. Now, they are rare and they are special and they are really similar to the energy of an eclipse. So a full Venus ascending and descending transit is 243 years apart. Now, remember, Pluto cycle is 248 years apart. So they are related and incarnationally related as well. So the nodal transits are about 125 years apart, and each transit comes in pairs, separated by 8 years. Okay, so what I mean by that is that the Gemini transits come in pairs, and the Sagittarius transit come in pairs, and they are separated by 125 years. Okay, so this is once again where the astro magic happened. So in 2004 and again in 2012, we had a transit of a lifetime. And this was a pair of Venus South Node transits. And it was essentially a new cycle for Venus. Now, you have to have been living in a cave if you missed the Passion in 2012. And the Passion was for awakening and the start of a new cycle in the Mayan calendar. And that, by the way, 2012 was due entirely to the precession of the equinoxes. Now, remember, Pluto was just past the conjunction degree of 4 degrees in 2012. So keep that in mind. All right. So Venus transits have happened in Gemini. And as I mentioned before, a full Venus transit cycle is 243 years. Now, this brings me to the amazement of transit cycles. In the last 500 years, since the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in 1518, we have had 3 Venus transits on the Gemini node. And most recent in history was 2004 and 2012. Then there was a pair in 1761 and 1769. And I have to mark here that Pluto was at the 4th degree of Capricorn for that Venus transit and was midway between conjunctions. And then in absolute cosmic perfection, there was a Venus transit in 1518 and 1526. This absolutely takes my breath away, and this brings together these two cycles in exquisite harmony. And to make it even more beautiful, actually poetic, it's incredible to look at a transit coming up this year in 2020. So we will have a Venus morning star point in May at the 13th degree of Gemini. In the cycle of Venus, we have come a full Venus star, a full Venus cycle since the Venus transit in 2012. And in fact, Venus will come very near to another transit after this conjunction, and it's just off by a couple degrees. So this is worthy of much more discussion, but I feel like this is a brand new, amazing, and beautiful Venusian energy. All right. So now I'd like to speak a bit about the magic of Capricorn. So the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, who I love, calls Capricorn the circle of grandmothers, and I love this. I do feel that Cancer and Capricorn hold the energy of ancestral ties. And so with Capricorn, it is being wise enough to listen to the whispers of the great ones who have come before you for guidance. So it is never to forget the generations that have brought you to that solar mountain that you have to climb. It is never forgetting that greatness must be guided with the compassion of a grandmother. So Capricorn, as I mentioned earlier, is actually a feminine sign, although we usually think of it as quite masculine in its archetypal achievements. All planets, except the sun and moon, have both day and night expressions, and Capricorn is the night expression. And it is actually the receptive side of the planet Saturn and the feminine side of Saturn. So this defies a lot of stereotypes of Capricorn. And I really love what this gives to Capricorn, kind of a softness. And Capricorn is such a powerful sign that I think that gentleness and softness that comes with feminine night and receptivity is really beautiful. So in a natural chart with 0 degrees of Aries on the rise, Cancer rules the 4th house and Capricorn the 10th. And this is actually also true for the wheel of the year, the solstices and equinoxes. Now, the 4th and 10th house are not always ruled by this sign, these signs, depending on what is rising, but there are conductive energies from the signs to these houses. So, the 4th house cusp, or the nadir, is the deepest part of the chart, and it is where our ancestral roots are, and the roots that drink in our strength. It is deep below the earth and below sight, and I feel that it is the quiet and growth that happens in the womb. The 10th house is the highest point of the sky, and it is the upper world of the world tree, and it is where we expand and proliferate and shine for all to see. It is associated with achievement and honor, and in a chart, anything that's on the cusp of the 10th house, which is also the winter solstice point, is considered to be highly evolved, highly vibrational, and very auspicious. So the signs of Cancer and Capricorn are also part of the waxing and waning of the solstice light on Earth, and the perihelion and aphelion, near and far, of our position of Earth to Sun. So in the Chaldean order of the planets, the ruler of Cancer, which is the moon, and the ruler of Capricorn, which is Saturn, were the fastest and slowest orbital energies, and they were the first and last planetary gates that a soul must travel through in its journey. And it is said in ancient days that the gates of Cancer and Capricorn were the ascension and descension of the human soul, and also the ascent and descent of gods to earth. And I think this is where we'll be headed, to a more pure connection with the divine, without books and translations, and a communication of earth gods and sky gods and the divine soul within each of us. So Capricorn, as we all who study astrology know, rules institutions. And given the power of this sign in the natural chart and the wheel of the year, I think this is why. And ideally, this is where we should make our laws, rules, and governments from a highly evolved state of mastery. Mastery is one of the words associated with Capricorn. And this should be done in the light without secrecy, because it is the height of the sky. It is a place of great collective power, and Capricorn is where we give our power willingly or unwillingly. As a sign ruled by Saturn, it is a sign that requires immense integrity and responsibility. And that is the accountability that should accompany great power, which has been earned through great wisdom. So, beyond our collective institutions, I would say that Capricorn energy is that of natural law, the laws of nature. It's physics. It's the laws of motion and matter. And I believe also the sign of sacred geometry, the divine blueprint of creation and the physical manifestations of greater truth. So, it is a highly spiritual sign expressed through an earth sign. Now, earth signs are physicality and structures that are created both in the 3D world and in the philosophic world. It's also a cardinal sign. And cardinal signs are the signs that begin the season and mark the change of the light. So Capricorn is cardinal earth. Now, cardinal energy has inertia and initiation, and it is the spark and the go. It's the potential and the beginning of where we create. So if there are two things that make the human very special, it is, one, the ability to create and to manifest imagination into existence. So we can do this with the physical or the theoretical world. And as I said before, Capricorn is the sign that the light is ever growing with the fire of the solstice sun. It is the inspiration of a new creative cycle. So often the personality of someone who is a Capricorn would include words like skeptical and logical. So I've been thinking about those words in relation to the spiritual nature of Capricorn. And this is the second quality that makes humans special. Besides creativity, it is reasoning. And in the golden age of philosophy, the attainment of logic was considered to be one of the highest achievements of the soul. It was akin to understanding to the divine. To see a greater pattern of the cosmic was to understand pure truth. And I think that is because once one deeply comprehends reason, natural law, basic structure, and indisputable truth, that is the wisdom that brings peace and justice and harmony to the spirit. This ability to create with the insight into natural law is why Capricorn is where we ideally should be creating our societies and our rules and our hierarchies. And that is also why I think the gates that open to a renaissance happen in Capricorn. So there's some talk of how I feel about Capricorn, and now I could ramble on for hours about the intricacies of the planets Saturn and Pluto, but I will try to be brief and relevant for this conjunction. So Saturn is ruler both of Capricorn and Aquarius in traditional astrology, and I will say that tradition is one of the facets of Saturn's character, as well as the rulership of time. So control and structures are one of the delicate balances of Saturn energy. And before any human eye had ever seen the rings around Saturn, Saturn was given the rulership of boundaries. So mostly I suspect that is because Saturn was the last of the visible wandering planets. So it was the boundary of our imaginal world of the cosmos. So Saturn is a serious energy, and an energy of vows and responsibilities. And I have often thought of Saturn as the conscience. It's the small voice we hear guiding us to right action, to act and react in accordance with natural law. And so, absolutely, listening or not listening to that voice is where we find the ruler of karma. And I have often thought about Saturn and his rings as they do relate to karma. So I feel that the rings of Saturn, metaphorically, are like the rings of trees. So each year, the actions of the tree and the environment that the tree is in leave a record in the ring of the tree. So it's visible and it's decipherable, but it's quite neutral in its accounting. And to me, this is where the role of Saturn, when it comes to karma, to the actions that we take in our lives. So lessons, devotion to work in the physical world and of the soul are the realms of Saturn. So I believe Saturn rules karma in a really neutral way, kind of like the idea of the Akashic records, accounting for deeds but absent of punishment. So then Pluto is the planet that does determine what karma must be dealt with and cleared away, and what no longer serves. So Pluto is iconically called the ruler of transformation. And sometimes I think this is a gentle way that's saying Pluto is indeed, like his name, who connects him with the ruler of the underworld in ancient times, is the planet of the end and the planet of death. It is the releasing of the old and unneeded to nurture and grow the new that has the ability to evolve into a completely new being. So it is the rebirth that follows death. Pluto is definitely intense, and it is where we hold our power, and since it's a very slow generational planet, it is where we hold our personal power and where we also hold our collective power. So the realms of Pluto are the hidden and the mysterious as well. So in brief, for right now, Saturn is the ruler of karma and the repercussions of actions we have taken and the responsibilities that we have had with soul contracts that we devote to. So Pluto, in a word, it's power and the transformative power, and death, a rebirth and release. So when I ponder the lessons that I feel each planet represents, it comes simply to this. Saturn is work, Pluto is surrender, and it is surrender to the mysteries and forces that are greater than yourself. The wise prayer affirmation that is used a lot in recovery programs, I feel, is very applicable to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And that is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That seems to fit very much the potentials of this conjunction. So my feeling is, when these energies come together, they are a review of karma and the use of power. Now, the two are vitally linked with each other, because power without boundaries and responsibility is very dangerous. So a reckoning and a clearing needs to happen to begin new. We are collectively looking at our karma, the actions and deeds of 500 years, especially in our great institutions and the places where we have the most concentrated power. So that's why I feel that the 500 years of time, 2 Pluto cycles without a conjunction, is so important. I do believe that wherever these two powerful planets meet, in whatever sign, is a beginning and an end simultaneously. In astrological and astronomical history, both planets have been, in their own time, the end. So it is an accounting of the responsible use of power and integrity in the archetype of whatever sign they meet in. So 500 years have passed since a karmic review in Capricorn, a reckoning to take actions or not take actions that were in alignment with higher and natural law. So I feel in many ways this is where we have made some tragic errors and some glorious success. The Renaissance cracked the structure of some of the most powerful establishments in the history of the world. And it was cracked because of the desire for people to connect with the divine and their own governance and their own personal empowerment. So the lack of karmic and transformational applications of a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn for 2 Pluto cycles has given hierarchical powers growth with very few boundaries and minimal conscience and very little consequence. The shadow sides of Saturn and Pluto and our great structures have been present throughout the most accelerated expansion of humanity in history. And I think this conjunction will be bringing awareness and ending to this shadow side of the last 500 years. So, since Pluto spends an average of 20 years in each sign, and Saturn's cycle is 29 years, it actually is entirely possible to go 2 Pluto cycles without a conjunction in every sign. And that is what really intrigues me about the last 500 years. It has been a very long time without these energies. to have a death and rebirth in Capricorn. So the last one was paradigm shifting in history. And the potential gates that were opened in the Renaissance have essentially brought us from the Dark Ages to the world that we're in right now of wonders and freedom. So in so many ways, we actually have climbed the Capricornian mountain, but we really have left a trail of destruction in our path. We have devoured the resources of a continent, the United States, well, actually a planet in 250 years, which is one Pluto cycle. And in that time, without the energy of karma and clearing, we have nearly eliminated the vast diversity of indigenous culture on this planet. And that is not even to mention plants and animals as well. So in many ways, our planet and our people are in peril right now. But really, on the other hand, we are actually living in one of the most amazing moments of history. So for the most part, humanity, we can really enjoy fairly good health and long lives right now. We do not have famine and pestilence and plague in the numbers that we did not that long ago. We still have greater freedoms than we've ever had before. In fact, particularly as a woman, would say this is the greatest time to be alive as a woman on planet Earth. And even though there is still inequity and injustice in the world, people are really waking up faster and faster to the awareness of the equality of all humans and the preciousness of life on Earth. So the concern for the health of the planet, which affects us all, is no longer just a fringe hippie philosophy. People are waking up to the secrets and shadows in our institutions as well. So I'm really optimistic that the consciousness that we are in will exponentially increase. And like the inertia of a cardinal sign, actions and great changes are about to be made. So I feel like the last 2 decades that we have been in have been a great balsamic phase of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And we're actually probably not even aware of the small actions that have happened that will start cracking the towers that are meant to crumble. So one thing to keep in mind, this conjunction is loosely trying to another Pluto conjunction that happened in the late 60s. So this is the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which was credited with the social revolutions that were ignited in the 60s. So once again, as in 1518, Uranus is in the Earth sign of Taurus and is headed for the degree that will lock in the trine with this conjunction. So I think one of the most powerful components of this conjunction is its relationship to greater cycles. So in this recording, I have listed so many, but in relation to the precession of the equinoxes, this is really the most potent point for me. In fact, we are still in a time where the winter solstice sunrise occurs on galactic center, and this is extraordinary. This doesn't happen again for 26,000 years. So, as I said before, galactic center is where it's been believed that we connect with Source and the consciousness of the divine. So, remember, the last conjunction happened on galactic center, and the solar eclipse preceding this conjunction happened in the same degree, but this time in the end of the solstice, which is sun still. So the light born on the solstice in this time is just infused with cosmic wisdom from Source. It is open and accessible to everyone. In the last conjunction, the written word and the paradigm that the written word was written in was the communication with divine. So consider once again that I have pondered that the preceding eclipses and nodes in Sagittarius and Gemini had an influence on the last conjunction. This time, if I am correct in that assumption, we will be influenced by the nodes of Cancer and Capricorn. So one of the most powerful insights that I have ever had about these signs, Cancer and Capricorn, and I've mentioned it before, were from the Neoplatonic philosophers, and it was probably a belief even earlier than them. And that is that the Cancer and Capricorn were the gates of the ascension and descension of souls of men and also of gods. So I believe that that could mean that our connection with the Source or the One will not be filtered through written words, paradigms, or even study, really. Our souls are here with the blessing of the Creator, and it is the divine spark within each of us that we will need in this time to be sovereign. This is very much the philosophy of the Corpus Hermetica of the last age. And so I think that this is the criteria that we can begin a new cycle when the debris of the last has been cleared away, and this will be the fire of our new Renaissance, that we are directly connected, ascending and descending as the divine does. So if you have listened this far, yay you, thank you. I know this is long. So I will leave you with my final epiphany. So as we wrap up the last 500 years of tragedy and triumph, we are also wrapping up a much larger cycle. So without question, we are in the balsamic phase of the age of Pisces. There is quite a lot of dispute about whether or not we are in the age of Aquarius right now. So officially, the spring equinox sun must rise on the last degree of Aquarius, which we're still a ways off from for us to officially be in that new age. So, in any case, there is no doubt that this is the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction that will happen in Capricorn for the age of Pisces. This is it. This is the final one. And I actually have to say I have not even looked at the next conjunction, which is so many centuries from now. But there is no doubt that when that conjunction happens, we will solidly be in an Aquarian age. So what I hope is that this glorious gate that we are stepping into will bring us with integrity and wisdom to a new dawn for a new time that we have created consciously and with integrity for many, many more than 7 generations. So thank you very much.